My name is Derrick Brooms. I'm the Executive Director of the Black Men's Research Institute here at Morehouse College, as well as a professor in the Department of Africana Studies and History. When we think about some of the ongoing and current issues related to higher education, specifically in regards to equity, diversity, inclusion, we think about the lowered representation of Black educators across the educational pipeline. That's including pre-K through 12, as well as in higher education more specifically. And then we think about the representation of Black men in higher education. There's a number of reasons why it's urgent, because Black men, teachers and educators, as well as faculty members, administrators, and leaders matter in a number of significant ways, not least of which is ways that they show up and represent for students, things about their possibilities. So we can think about students' academic achievement levels. We can think about the ways in which students engage in the learning environment as well as in the educational institution. We can also think about the ways in which their experiences are much more robust, given some of the representation, pedagogy, and practices that Black educators continue to engage in. And then when we think about Black men, even more specifically, we know that we live in a credentialed society. And so some of the barriers and life experiences that Black men face are credentials. Do they have the appropriate, if you will, credentials to be eligible for particular job opportunities? We know that education and higher levels of education is contributed to health and well-being, as well as life outcomes, thinking about health and wellness. And so there's direct correlations that research has shown that Black men being involved in higher education as students, as well as faculty, staff, and administrators, play a significant role in the life worlds of educational institutions, but then also in student success as well. When we think about the representation of Black teachers, faculty, administrators across the educational pipeline, and I'll speak very specifically about higher education. So when we think about Black educators, and even more specifically, Black men as faculty and educational leaders, these serve as powerful representations of Black men's possibilities. In order to, in being able to see folks who look like you, this provides this visual of possibility in terms of one's own self. And I think that's just really at the first level. I want to go a little bit deeper and think about the specific types of pedagogy and practices that Black educators, again, in general, but Black men even more specifically, engage in. So there's one thing to see a representation of yourself at the front of the classroom, if you will, or leading the classroom. But it's even more significant when you have that form of representation and the types of culturally relevant, culturally responsive, culturally sustaining pedagogy that Black educators and Black men teachers continue to engage in. We have research that shows that all students, not just Black boys and men, all students benefit from the positive impact of Black men teachers in the classroom, Black men faculty in higher education. And so we think about why representation matters. Again, as mentioned, number one, there's a signal to those students that you matter, I see you. There are potentially ways that I might be able to develop a connection with you through my race and gender identities, but it also creates fertile ground for connecting with students across their other social identities as well. And so we know that identities matter in how students think about themselves. And so perhaps in seeing this Black man educator, Black man faculty for higher education, we can see ways that perhaps this person has a sense of, or some shared experience or shared knowledge, intrinsically, perhaps even proximal, that they can relate to perhaps some of the ways in which I might experience this educational journey. And then there's ways that we develop relationships. And so these individuals may become mentors, advisors, guides, supporters. They may help elicit other forms of support, right? I don't think there's necessarily a single educator that might be able to serve all the roles of students. And so when we think about there being a more robust number of Black men educators in higher education, it allows for greater support and more holistic support for Black men as students. So when we think about the ongoing reports, or recent reports and ongoing reports of Black men's enrollment in higher education, and we want to specifically give consideration to their enrollment in 2-year colleges, right? So community colleges, as well as their 4-year institutions. And I think there's some similarities and differences in both of the institutional types. And so when we think about some of the ways that this might reveal itself, or what might be some of the factors that contribute to this, I think there's a range. Some of these are persistent, and we can think about Black boys and men themselves, and what are some of the messages they receive along their educational journeys from PK through 12th grade, secondary school, especially and particularly here in the U.S. What are the messages that Black boys are being told about their educational abilities, right? What we know when we look at, we can look at the data on the one hand, but we can also look at some of the things at the local levels and national levels. We know that Black boys are celebrated much more fondly, much more robustly for their athletic engagement and accomplishments than they are for their academic engagement, than they are for their scholastic accomplishments. And so these send powerful messages to Black boys that we will celebrate you if you do well in sports. If you do well in academics, too often we exceptionalize those Black boys and actually in some ways pit them against other Black boys. Why aren't you performing as well as this student here? But we also know that Black boys are overrepresented in discipline actions. We know that they're overrepresented in school suspensions, detentions, and a range of different discipline-related consequences as it relates through, again, across this PK through 12 pipeline. And so all of those types of points of contact, whether that be, again, personal, whether that be proximal with my peers, those send powerful messages about their belonging and the sense of expectation. Do I expect you to achieve academically and scholastically, or do I expect you to misbehave, or as Annette Ferguson talks about, to be a quote unquote bad boy? And so if my expectation of you is to be a bad boy, which means that you're up to no good, then my gaze turns into looking for you to engage in behaviors that I can then surveil, discipline, and punish. We don't have the same type of vigilance. We don't have the same type of robustness in looking for the brilliance in Black boys, even whether it might be latent, whether it might be revealing itself in other facets of their schooling experiences. And so these then send powerful messages about what we expect you to do. We know that there are some Black boys who, let me take a step back. Black boys achieve at a range of levels across their abilities, capabilities, and desires. That's true for every student group across racial and gender backgrounds. And so we have to think about, what are we doing within schooling environments that tell Black boys that you matter, that I see you, that I value you, that I love you, right? For being who you are. You don't have to fix yourself for me. So that if I'm going to school and I'm being policed based on what I wear with my clothing and attire, whether it's my hair, whether it's how I engage or do not engage in the classroom, these then turn into forms of surveillance. Am I here to get educated, or am I here to be punished? That can push Black boys away from schooling engagement. And we see this going back to the 1980s. With regards to some of the trends. So when we map that forward, right, we think about how Black men then, young Black men and Black men show up in higher education. Many of us, and I include myself in this, because I'm not at all exempt from our broader experiences. What that means is that we enter college campuses sometimes unsure if I can even succeed. In some of my own research, as I talk to young Black men about their journeys from secondary school to college, some of the things they talked about was, in secondary school, these guys went to a particularly counter-hegemonic school where they were affirmed, that teachers believed in them, poured into them. They talked about during their high school years, they thought they could accomplish any of their dreams. And by the end of their first year in college, they engaged in self-doubt. They had and expressed internal dilemmas of, can I make it, right? They went from, I always knew I was smart, to, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to make it at this particular institution. Some of that has to deal with institutional environments, especially at predominantly white and historically white institutions. And again, the micro and macro messages that get sent to Black men about their notions of belonging, achievement, excellence, thriving, etc. We know that at HBCUs, Black men's educational experiences as well as their outcomes often look very different than they do at predominantly white and historically white institutions. And then there's some research coming out about Black men's experiences at other minority-serving institutions, specifically such as Hispanic-serving institutions, ways in which they feel validated in some regards, but then also experience invalidations in other regards. And so there's this really complex picture of Black men's experiences in higher education that we really have to look back into those previous pre-college years to understand what it was that they were experiencing and how that might inform how they show up in their college years, either in their transition strategies, how they engage on campus, how they engage in the academic domains, and what this means for their retention, persistence, and matriculation. We're very excited for our upcoming 2026 Black Men Research Institute's Annual Spring Symposium. This year our theme is Black Men in Higher Education. And not only is this the theme that we're using for our 2-day symposium on March 25th and 26th of this year, this is also the theme and topic that we've covered through our public lecture series since September, and we'll continue with another session in April. Some of these conversations have engaged and centered on retaining Black men in higher education, Black men's voice and agency in ways that they think about and express themselves, Black boys and young men's educational desires. We've also looked at masculinities and what this means for their higher education experiences. And again, we've also looked at their engagement on campus. And so how does their engagement in non-academic spaces matter to how they experience the college environment and what this means for their relationships and perhaps their pursuit of success. And so attendees can expect more of these types of conversations. We have 3 phenomenal keynote speakers, Dr. Eric Hines, who's a counselor educator at George Mason University, who will be our lead-off speaker for our opening symposium on Wednesday, March 25th. We have Dr. Matthew Smith, who's Associate Vice President of Students and Associate Vice President of Student Affairs and Dean of Students at Cal State University, San Bernardino. And then we'll close with Dr. William A. Smith, who's a distinguished professor at the University of Utah. And so we think about these 3 speakers and the work that they've done across their careers in higher education. They are really able to offer some critical insights on the ways in which Black men's health and wellness matter in their college experiences, forms of mentorship and brotherhood, and how this might matter in not only their relationships, how they think about themselves, and also in their academic engagements as well. And then, of course, the multi-tiered factors that contribute to some of the barriers, stresses, and challenges that Black men experience, such as racial microaggressions, anti-Black misandry, and even perhaps racial battle fatigue, as Dr. Smith has been prolific in these areas in offering that. We'll follow each of these sessions with some form of a panel discussion or small group discussion among the presenters and other invited guests, including students. And so we'll engage in robust conversations with regards to not only what is the current status of Black men in higher education and what have we learned from research, but also what ought we be paying attention to and looking at in the future, especially in this changing landscape of policies and practices in higher education, such as changing of admissions policies, attacks on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and through the different pedagogies and practices that faculty members might engage. And so we're really excited about our guest speakers. We're really excited about our student engagement and external partners to contribute to and continue a robust conversation and exploration of Black men in higher education.